This is a Culture Inject production. The Nevers Podcast presents Firefly, Back in the Skies.
Welcome back to our retrospective series, Firefly, Back in the Skies. I'm Chirag, and we have with us as well...
Hi, I'm Laura.
And this week we're going to be talking a little bit about episode 3, which is called Bushwhacked. Bushwhacked.
So, just a small synopsis for you for this episode. Serenity is pulled in by an Alliance cruiser while investigating a spaceship that was attacked by Reavers. Simon and River must hide to prevent capture while something is wrong with the lone survivor of the attacked ship. And this originally aired in 2002, September 27th.
So we have the usual cast and crew introducing this time around. Doug Savant as Commander Harkin, Brandon Morgan as the sole survivor. This episode is written by Joss Whedon and Tim Minear, and it's directed by Tim Minear.
So, just out of curiosity, have you watched any of Tim's other shows?
No, I have not. My relationship with his work is monogamous to Firefly. How about you?
Yeah, I had a quick look online, and I think we're pretty much the same. I mean, he's written episodes of like Dollhouse and Angel and that, obviously, but nothing else of his.
Right.
I don't think I've watched. So yeah,
I think he did American Horror Story, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I saw that on IMDb. I'm not a watcher of American Horror Story. I know some people who are big fans, but I've never actually watched a single episode of it.
Yeah, neither have I. So we have a question over here, I guess, before we jump into the episode. It's asking, do you find it strange that Harkin was not given information on the TAMs? Information on them was made available to the bounty hunters, federal agents, and marshals, and was posted on the Cortex and shown to others by, I guess, the hands of blue guys. I thought that I thought he was given that information, because doesn't he ask on the ship, like, are you harboring fugitives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it means kind of like the information they have seems to be very vague, that they're just looking for two fugitives, a man and a woman, a brother and a sister, but that's kind of it. They're not given anything more than that. Like, I don't even think they possibly know their names. And I guess we go on to learn that obviously it's all very, very, very secretive. I don't know, unless you're really high up in the Alliance, you're not going to be privy to all of this in the know stuff. But it would have, would they have maybe caught them if it was more of a knowledgeable thing and they knew exactly who they were looking for?
I don't know, probably not, I feel like. It is kind of mirrored, though, in the sense that in the same way that the Alliance officers are not given any information on River, neither are we as an audience.
Yeah. And
the only people that know are the Alliance of the writers or whoever's in charge of the story. And it will stay that way for a while. All right. Okay, so just jumping into the conversation.
So, I mean, I guess this episode opens on them all playing this ball game. Which is really nice, because it's getting to see the crew have their, their kind of fun downtime when they're not off pulling heists and whatever.
Yeah, and I did have some thoughts about the opening scene, which, as you said, is Simon and Inara watching the crew play hoop ball or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that opening sequence scene represents the key theme of this episode and of the show, which is civilization versus the frontier. So basically, like, down below, the crew are like these uncivilized hooligans playing some poor man's hoop ball with no proper rules or regulations, and it's chaotic and anarchic, right? And then the two most civilized, cultured characters, who are Simon and Inara, are watching the game from above. So it's kind of like a Downton Abbey upstairs downstairs thing visually, where like we have the civilized characters in high positions spatially, and they're looking down at the uncivilized peasants playing their gladiator games. In that scene, Inara asks, "Who's winning?" And Simon responds, "They don't seem to be playing by any civilized rules." And Inara responds, "Well, we're far from civilization." So right from that opening, we're establishing what this episode is going to be about. It's the civilization versus the frontier. Right? And then that proximity alarm thing goes off and Wash has to go back to work. And Kaylee inviting Simon to join the game is metaphorically her inviting Simon to come down from his high civilized perch and unclench those buttocks and join her world of freedom and the frontier and living on that raggedy edge. Because like right now, Simon is living on the raggedy edge, but not by choice. Like emotionally, he's still in that place of I'm a civilized doctor and I'm very intelligent and I got the highest grades and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
you
can see from their vantage point though that they can see that maybe this uncivilized way of life is actually a bit more fun and a bit more adventurous, and they're intrigued. And the same as you see River looking down on them and the excitement in her face, and it's kind of like nice to see, like Simon's looking at her and you can see that she's enjoying something. She's not thinking about necessarily, all this hardship that she's been through.
Right, and the contrast between Simon and River's reactions is something that's very beautifully encapsulated in that scene where they're hanging on the side of the Serenity, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know which scene I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, lovely moment. So there's quite a few funny little quips in this bit, but I guess the funniest, I think Wash shows quite well in this episode, just for like funny one-liners. So when the alarm goes off, he's panicking. He's like, what can it be? He's like, who's flying this thing? He's like, oh, that would be me. Yeah.
He's a fun guy.
He's a very fun guy.
I was gonna say about the Simon and Kaylee relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but maybe you can add to the chorus of what my thought is. But I thought, and I didn't realize it before I was watching this time, that their love story is so beautifully ironic in the sense that because we have Simon, this character who represents the absolute paragon of civilization, right? He's been so successful and so rewarded by Alliance high society, being a doctor and that. So Simon would love the Alliance. Simon loves the system archetypically.
Mm-hmm.
He loves that order and that hierarchy. He doesn't fight the machine. He is part of the machine. And by all conventional logic, Simon would be a guy who votes for the establishment. And then this weird, crazy circumstance happens with his sister that turns his life upside down, and he's forced to be on the run from a civilization in which he's very comfortable. And he doesn't want to be on the run, but he has to be. So I think the plan for his character could have been that Simon falling in love with Kaylee would be a metaphor for Simon owning his life on the raggedy edge and on the frontier and becoming more comfortable in the mud and the dirt and the engine grease and the freedom of that life and joining that hoop ball game that has no civilized rules and having fun with it and that kind of thing. I think that's the direction he was heading.
Mm.
And ultimately in the Serenity movie, they kind of just consummate that arc with him just Kaylee and him getting together at the end. And but it would have been cool to go on that journey.
Yeah, I think like their love story, as it were, like on the face of it, they're just these two really cute, innocent, shy people. Not necessarily, but like when it comes to them, it's like blatantly obvious that they both like each other, yet neither of them are like brave enough to say it.
Well, Kaylee's pretty brave, I have to say. She gets pretty bold later on. It's Simon who's kind of a little anal, or what's the right word? Like he's kind of tight-assed, or he doesn't express himself emotionally
in
the way that someone who's grown up in that kind of in the coldness of a disconnected society, that it's very much what the Alliance is a stand-in for. We don't know really how to express our connection with each other in that way. Mm-hmm. Whereas Kaylee, who's so free and open, and like her introduction is sexually, like she's having sex with the dude in the engine room, and she's so, just unrestrained and unbridled, that's the good part of The Edge. And we see the bad part, and we will get to the bad part.
We will get to many bad parts.
Yes.
So in this episode, they all end up in the forgotten what the part of the ship is.
You mean the derelict?
No, I just mean up in the control room of a ship where one would fly the ship.
Oh, the cockpit.
The cockpit. There we go. So they all end up in the cockpit, and they're seeing the derelict ship that's just kind of spinning around in space. Oh, and then obviously, a dead body hits the ship when Wash is there. That's got to be a bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah, and then Jane's like, I think my theory is that the guy did him in and went for a swim to see how quickly the blood would boil out of his ears.
Yeah, and Wash is just like, you're a very up person.
Yeah.
It's good. Yeah, it's good to see. I think, this episode has a lot of good little lines from Wash and Jane, actually. They're kind of both...
He's so wonderfully terrible.
It's brilliant. I love it. I also like how we see River, they're like, what's going on? What is it? And River says ghosts or ghost. So it's almost like we're seeing that she can sense or feel kind of what's going on. Like she can sense everything on the other ship.
She sees dead people.
She sees dead people.
She has a sixth sense.
Very special ability, and we're seeing why the Alliance might find this so valuable.
So, just kind of like isolating one thing that, I guess I'm not going in order here, but one thing that I noticed that ties into the theme is that the word nothing is used a lot. Did you notice this in the episode? They use the word nothing a lot.
Right.
Like Simon says in one scene, the thought of a little mylar and glass being the only thing separating a person from nothing is terrifying. And we do see that Simon is terrified of that nothingness with his whole claustrophobic, terrifying spacesuit walk. Or like we can hear his breath, and it's building this horror and suspense thing, and he's walking through that ship, and there's like a red balloon. That's whoever designed that set did a terrific job.
Yeah.
But I think that the writers are using the word nothing in Simon's case to refer to the nothingness of deep space, where there's no civilization or purpose. Like there's no alliance or hospitals or rank and order. It's just an infinite black void, and it's that nothingness that terrifies Simon.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to me that Simon is terrified of deep space because he spent his whole life being very comfortable standing on land.
Yeah.
So if you take him into deep space where there's no oxygen and no rules and no gravity to be firmly rooted in, Simon is going to freak out. And I think, which is why, going back to that scene where Simon and River are hiding from the Alliance by clinging to the outer body of Serenity, is such a beautiful character study, because when Simon looks out into the nothingness of space, he looks sick and afraid, because to him that nothingness is something that's been forced onto him, and he longs for the somethingness of his hospital, his friends, his social society, the comfortable alliance civilization, and that kind of stuff. But when River looks out into the nothingness, she has this beautiful expression of joy and excitement and wonder, because for River, that vast nothingness represents like freedom from the somethingness of corrupt governments and malicious bureaucracies playing with her brain. Like to her, that's what civilization represents. So to be away from civilization and to be in this nothingness of space is liberation. As opposed to for Simon, it's a trap that will consume him. but he looks at her and he sees her reaction, and she's the reason he's in this situation. So I thought that was such a beautiful like portrait of their relationship with each other in all of its in all of its love and in all of its insecurity and regret. I thought that was really a cool scene. And then I want to say one more instance in which the word nothing is used, and the word nothing is used again by Mal to describe the Reavers. So Mal says, Reavers ain't men, they forgot how to be, come to just nothing. They got out to the edge of the galaxy, to that place of nothing, and that's what they became. And so I think in Mal's case, the writers are using the word nothing to refer to what happens to a man who drifts too far from civilization and purpose and meaning. Man becomes a reaver, a mad, meaningless object of terror and appetite. And I think, when I think about it, that sounds to me like a metaphor for nihilism, where the fear is that if we drift too far from civilization and from purpose and meaning, and we realize that everything is meaningless, we could just become these mad, marauding reavers, raping, killing, doing whatever. There's no moral code. And in Mal's case, when he was fighting the Alliance, his life had meaning and purpose. And when he lost that fight, he kind of lost his meaning and purpose too. And he did drift far away from civilization to the edge of the galaxy, that place of nothing. And he did become jaded, and he did become nihilistic. And I think somewhere inside him, he knows that. He's aware of what he's lost, and he wants to regain it. And I think that's also the reason that Jane is so scared of the Reavers, because Jane doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't have any philosophy. And somewhere inside Jane, I think he's scared that in the Reavers, he sees potentially himself and what he could become.
Yeah, because we kind of established that Jane is the guy with no morals and no kind of like code. You know, he's out for himself. So I guess he's that fine line between, you know, are you a good person or are you just nothing?
Yeah, and like even philosophically, he's that fine line between humanity in all of its purpose and meaning, and you can say self-importance and righteousness and whatever. And on the other side of that, you have just complete meaningless, self-sustaining, just do whatever it takes to satiate your own appetite and that kind of thing, which is what the Reavers are. And Jane is on that line the most. And it makes sense that he's the guy who's the most scared of the Reavers, because he's the guy who's the most similar to them. Any other thoughts or funny scenes or lines or anything?
I mean, I guess one of the funniest moments was the spacesuit.
Yeah.
After the spacesuit walk, that was very, like you say, a very well set up scene with the breathing. And yeah, when he gets there and they're all just laughing. Well, he's laughing. Everyone else is like, why are you in a suit?
Yeah, it's like the pilot episode with the whole thing with Kaylee, she's dead.
Yeah, and then to top it off, Kaylee goes over and is like, kind of like, oh, honey, you know, it wasn't on right. So if it was the void of space, he would have died, kind of thing. Yeah. You know, the thing that he's so scared of, but he put his suit on wrong and very easily could have died. But it's interesting to see how, yeah, like scared he is of something. But for like Mal and Zoe and whoever, they, you know, putting a suit on and going out into the void of space is just a part of their life. And, you know, it's just normal. Whereas like, say for him in the life that he's come from, it's scary and it's really something out there.
Yeah. Well, I think that has a lot to do with like we were talking about earlier, which is the theme of civilization versus the frontier, where Mal and Zoe are very much they're on that front. They're for that frontier life.
Yeah.
Like they do that. They're comfortable with that. Whereas Simon is more about the civilization life. He spent his whole life in civilization, so that's what he knows. So they are kind of on the opposite ends of that spectrum. And just as far as that theme goes, and I want to talk about it more broadly with this episode because it's really cool, I think, what this episode does. So, as I talked about earlier, the opening scene represents the theme of civilization versus the frontier on a smaller scale. Like with Simon and Inara symbolizing civilization, and the crew symbolizing the frontier. But the really interesting thing that this episode does in representing that theme on a more broad macro level, and I'll explain what I mean, is that, so this episode is divided into two parts. The first part takes place in the frontier, in deep space. It's on that dark, abandoned derelict. It's horrifying. Like, we encounter Reavers for the first time for real. So that's the first part of the show. And then the second part of the episode takes place in this little bubble of civilization and order and hierarchy when the Alliance comes in and the crew gets interrogated by the Alliance bureaucracy guy. So there's these two very distinct halves of the show that are so different from each other. And I think that the fact that they're so sharply different from one another, that makes me think they're being contrasted with each other on a writing level. Like, on one hand, you have Reavers, and on the other hand, you have the Alliance. And Reavers are philosophically the extreme version of what we think will happen to us in the absence of civilization and meaning. And the Alliance are philosophically what we think will happen to us when our civilization becomes bloated and encrusted with hierarchy and an autocracy. So I think what this episode is really doing is it's setting up the Reavers and the Alliance to be two sides of the same coin. Those two things are really mirrored against each other, the Reavers and the Alliance. And that theme of civilization versus the frontier is kind of literalized when the Alliance officers who represent their civilization are literally having to fight the Reaver guy who represents the frontier. And it is like it is a clash between the two in the most interesting way. So that's all I had to say really thematically. I thought this episode did a really good job with that.
Yeah. So putting it back to just kind of the story, obviously when they dock with the other ship, we get the weird little tentacle things, which I see as like a really intricate kind of piece of technology. And that's one of the...
Are you talking about the booby trap?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where you're thinking about these Reavers as being kind of like barbaric, I don't know, immoral creatures that are not really maybe thinking, yet they fly around in space. They can run spaceships and put contraptions like this everywhere. So also they're smart, smart enough to do stuff like that, which makes them kind of scarier.
Yeah, that's true. Like, they're not zombies, but then again, there's the thing that even a barbaric person, if the technology is there, they can just use it. It's not like they had to engineer it themselves, but if you give a monkey a gun, it can shoot you. Like, it's able to. You know what I mean?
And then we had the whole conversation about oh no, I'm skipping. Let's go. So obviously they go over to the ship. Oh, and then we get I love the whole bit with Wash radioing over to, because he's like, no one's replying to him. And he's like, what's happening? And Zoe just replies, not now, dear. And he's just like, just stop straight away. He's like, okay. Because in that you see, like, again, how badass Zoe is, how kind of lovely and obedient Wash is, but also that he knows Zoe's okay now, so he doesn't really care about it. What's going on. Because this is after Jane's been attacked, right? And this is like Simon's moment to shine and get a little bit of payback on Jane. And he's like, oh yeah, he's a real beast. It's a wonder you're still alive. He's throwing some...
That's the tiniest guy.
It's throwing some real shade at Jane. And then we have, here's where I was skipping to, is the whole funeral conversation. So the book wants to go over and kind of like read the rights and everything and put these people to rest. And Mal, surprisingly, is like, yeah, we should do this. And you're kind of like, oh, okay, this is strange. This is a turn. And Anara's looking at him the same way, kind of like, wow, there's more to you than I thought, kind of thing. And then after all of that, we realise it's just to get rid of them because Mal needs to sort out this booby trap situation. But does he really care deep down about these people being put to rest? Because, he's come from a place of war where you would try to put all of your soldiers to rest properly, right? You don't just leave them out on the battlefield.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think he says that there was an ulterior motive just to keep them busy, but I think we're meant to think deep down that there is something there where he did care about doing that the right way. But that's also like the leader thing to do, which is to, prevent panic and get the situation under control and manage it while also coming off benevolent somehow. Master strokes.
And then we see them dealing with the booby trap, and I feel like this is Kaylee's moment. I mean, she gets a lot of moments, she is, like, if she wasn't out in nowhere, she would be, like, if she was, in the civilization, she could have been, like, the Alliance's greatest engineer or something, Ships just speak to her, and this is, like, her superpower. And it's nice to see...
Yeah, it's like the penance phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's nice to see kind of how Mal and everyone else looks at her. Like, they're clearly very proud of her because she's, like, younger, and it's just really nice to see.
Yeah. What did you think of the interrogation scene?
Yes. This is where I wrote all my next notes. I'm like, it's interesting to see kind of where everybody's priorities kind of lie. So when they take them... Kaylee's again speaking about the ship and that they're calling it a heap of junk or whatever, and she's that's all that she's talking about in her interrogation, right? And then you've got Zoe, who's like not giving anything. She's like a brick wall, and she's so badass. And then it cuts to Wash, and he's just talking about Zoe because Zoe is his world, right?
Yeah.
And
I don't know if you noticed, but when Inara was getting interrogated, she was talking about Mal for some reason or another. I don't remember. And then it cuts back to the Alliance guy, and he asks, "Do you love him?" And then for a second, we as an audience are like, "Oh, he's asking her the question that we want to ask."
Yeah.
Does she love Mal? Then it cuts, and it's not Inara, it's Zoe he's asking the question to.
Yeah.
That's such a good editing, it's such a good cut to, like, subvert audience expectations there. And it does that a couple times in that sequence, in that interrogation sequence. It's a really good job.
Yeah, because it cuts between their different interrogations and also between the soldiers searching the ship, right? So you kind of see bits and pieces all together. But, yeah, I love that. They're like, do you love him? And she's like, that's irrelevant. And they're like, well, he's your husband. And then obviously you get the big conversation with Mal and about the Reavers, like you were speaking about earlier. It's interesting to see how, even though a lot of people on the border planets might still think that Reavers are a myth because they've not seen them, I think deep down they all kind of think it's real. Or like they're like Jane and they really, really are scared and think it's real. But like the Alliance are just like, nope, they don't exist. It's madness. This is just a story, And
right. Well, Mal even says that. Oh, this is your first tour this deep in space. Like they're so in that orbit of the central planets. They've never been this far away from civilization to experience what is there and what happens to a man.
We also get another quote from Mal about the war where he said, we was on the losing side, but not the wrong one.
Yes. So I wanted to say something about that. And I'm just going to target 2 to 3 minutes to go on a bit of a tangent on that line.
Okay.
So like you said, so Mal says, I may have been on the losing side, still not convinced it was the wrong one. So that piece of dialogue really clicked into my head, something that one of the listeners has mentioned in several letters, which is characters fighting a battle regardless of the futility of the fight. You know, just like Penance goes to rescue Malady, and that's heroic regardless of the fact that her efforts were futile and meaningless because it was Malady's plan to die.
Yeah.
And another example, in the last episode of Angel, Angel and all of his surviving friends, they're all like hurt and bleeding and injured and on the verge of dying, and they charge into that losing battle with the horde of demons and dragons and whatnot. It's a losing battle, and they still, brandish their swords and get ready for the collision because the fight is about the fight, regardless of the futility of it. And there's a pattern of this throughout the Whedonverse that I wanted to just take a minute to relate to the myth of Sisyphus. I don't know if you've heard of Sisyphus. I think Mal is the ultimate Sisyphusian hero, and I'll explain why. And that may sound Greek and pretentious, because it is. But so in Greek mythology, the character of Sisyphus was this guy who was intensely passionate about life, and he was very clever, and he hated death. And Sisyphus used his cleverness to fool the gods so that he could escape death and he could continue to live his passions in life. And he had a lot of passions in life. He really lived. And at one point, Sisyphus even shackles the personification of death in chains, and everybody in the world stops dying, and life is passionate and meaningful and forever. But Hades got really pissed off that his dark kingdom was getting empty, and the floor plan was coming open or whatever. And so he got together with his family and the gods, and they grabbed Sisyphus, and the gods condemned him to an eternity of ceaselessly rolling a rock up a mountain. And when he reaches the top of the mountain, the rock just rolls back down of its own weight, and Sisyphus has to start again forever. So basically the punishment here is that Sisyphus must endure futile, meaningless labor forever. And the connection I want to make is that in that same exact way, Mal's punishment for being passionate and having a purpose and a meaning and fighting in a war that he believes in is that the Alliance have condemned him to a life at the edge of the galaxy where every day he pushes that rock up the mountain only for it to roll back down again. Every job Mal does, every job that he does to keep fuel in the tank is a rock he's pushing up the mountain, and every time that rock is going to roll right back to the bottom, and Mal's going to start again forever. And this is the problem of nihilism, that everything we do is futile labor and totally devoid of meaning and purpose. But I think the beautiful thing is that the fact that in the face of this curse of nihilism, of this punishment of nihilism, Sisyphus doesn't just sit at the top of the mountain and give up, right? He keeps rolling that rock. And in the same way, Mal, he gets shot, he gets chased, he gets hurt, but Mal doesn't give up, despite the futility of it all. He keeps flying. Mal just keeps going and keeps flying, and by the seat of his pants. And I think that is the beauty of it, and that we do what we do passionately despite the futility of it all. And to quote a line from Angel that Joss Whedon wrote, "If nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do." So I think that's kind of an idea that's very prevalent in all of these shows, really. And one little last connection I wanted to make. So as I was saying, like Sisyphus, the Greek figure, he's a figure who is like intensely passionate about life. And the name Zoe is a Greek name meaning life. And Zoe is Mal's biggest connection to a time in which he lived life passionately and believed in a higher purpose and a life of meaning. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Mal's connection to life is Zoe, and her name means life in Greek. And Mal is kind of that Sisyphusian hero. And I don't know, all of those puzzle pieces kind of came together for me when I was watching it. And that's the end of the tangent.
It was a very interesting tangent.
Thank you.
I always learn so much.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, I this was easily like a top 5, top 3 episode for me. I loved this episode. Yeah, I put it up there with Out of Gas and Objects in Space and Janestown. This is like one of the top-notch ones. I really liked it.
I think for me, it's never kind of been one of the standouts, but I did thoroughly enjoy watching it this time round. But it's not got the same kind of big adventure, you know, or super funny stuff, like big events going on. It's more of like a very, like you've just explained, lots and lots of deep stuff going on. And it's nice to get the first look at the closest thing that we see in this TV show to a real Reaver.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think this episode really puts the kind of it really into perspective, kind of life out there in the verse.
Yeah, but I will say the interrogation sequence is by far the funniest sequence in any episode in all of the show.
Oh, really? It's like your favourite part?
Yeah. It is, yeah. I thought that was my favorite of everything. That was my favorite. I mean, those are my final thoughts, really. I love the episode.
Yeah, it's a very nicely put together episode.
Mm-hmm. And then towards the end, I guess Mal helps the Alliance guys and saves the commander's life, and they go off, but they lose the cargo. And just like that, in the beginning of the episode, he rolls that rock up the hill, and they get the cargo, and they get rid of the booby trap, and they escape the booby trap, and they escape the Alliance. But then they lose the cargo, and the rock falls back to the bottom, and we start again in the next episode, rolling the rock back up. That's what this is. That's what this show is about, really. Just continuing to do the work, even though there's really that deep in space, there's no meaning to it, almost, other than the meaning that we make together as a crew and as friends and as lovers and as, all sorts of cool stuff.
So do you think in Mal's mind he kind of thinks that one day they'll have a better life and a more secure life, or
yes,
you do?
I do think that, and I think that's the reason he kept Simon and River. I think that he subconsciously knows they are his key to regaining that purpose and that life of meaning, and it is what happens in the movie Serenity, which is that River kind of is the key into re-entering that war against the Alliance for Mal and winning that war in a very meaningful way for the entire galaxy. Yeah. Yeah,
we finally get to see in the movie him have his day.
Exactly, yeah. And I would be interested to see where it would go if Serenity had a sequel. Like, what would you talk about thematically with Mal? Where would he go from there? Now that I'm thinking of it, you would almost have to subvert the Alliance somehow, where, that revelation that they were creating Reavers kind of just destroys them, and they turn to ash, and from that ash is born a new Alliance that is a bit more progressive and that is, better. And I don't know, and then maybe the independents become the more antagonistic as opposed to the alliance, and maybe that gets subverted that way, and that would be an interesting universe to throw Mal into, where now his object of contempt are the people who are really helping everyone, and his side of the coin are people who are causing riots and doing bad stuff, and that would be an interesting place to go, I feel like.
So we have an interview coming out with Tim Leben. Tim Leben is the author of the new Firefly Generations. So we're going to play a little bit of the interview, but I just want to say that, it was really fantastic to talk with Tim. He's written like Star Wars stuff and Alien and like Predator stuff in the past. So if you're interested in any of that, then you should definitely look up all of these books. He's also done like a lot of novelizations of movies, and one of his books, The Silence, was made into a movie on Netflix. Yeah, but he was a really great guy. He had an entire wall of books and a face hugger and all kinds of cool stuff in his room.
What is a face hugger? Is that alien related?
So that's alien related. Yeah, that's like the baby alien that comes out of the eggs.
Okay.
And it gives you a nice hug on your face that just might kill you.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, that sounds cute. That sounds like something that I would want to happen.
No, you definitely don't want that to happen. Have you not watched Alien?
I have seen Alien. I saw the first one, but I didn't. I think I saw it when I was too little or something, because it didn't really marinate in my consciousness. So,
Alien spoiler for anyone that's not watched the 40-year-old film. But he's like really into everything kind of horror and thriller, a lot of really good stuff. And obviously, Firefly Generations. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So I guess we'll get started just by asking, were you a watcher of Firefly when it first aired on TV?
Not when it first aired. So I caught up with it subsequent to its first airing and watched the series and really enjoyed it. And that was quite a while ago. And then Titan approached me to write a novel. So I needed to do a rewatch, which I did on my, I'm a keen cyclist and triathlete. So I got my static bike set up in the living room and spent the day watching. I sat on my bike for 4 hours and watched several episodes of Firefly and started catching up with it. And it was great to go back to it and rediscover the universe, the verse.
You mentioned there that, Titan approached you, but
yeah,
what was the full chain of events that kind of led you to finally writing Firefly Generations?
Well, I'd written quite a few tie-in novels before that. I think my first tie-in novel was either a Hellboy novel or original novel, or I also did the novelization of Cabin in the Woods, another Joss Whedon project, which took ages to be published because I think Cabin in the Woods was tied up in some studio going through or something. I can't remember the specifics. So I'd done a few tie-in novels, some for other publishers, but I'd also done several for Titan. Done an Alien novel, and Cabin in the Woods was for Titan, and I did the Rage War trilogy, Alien Predator trilogy as well. So I had a good relationship. I still have a good relationship with Titan, and the editor there, Kat Camacho, approached me to ask if I fancied doing a Firefly, because I think James Lovegrove had written several by them, 2 or 3 at least. And obviously I said yes. So I get offered a fair bit of tie-in work, and I never say yes to something that I don't think I really enjoy doing. I've been offered a few that I think, I'm not sure that's really my thing. But yeah, I jumped at this, and it's such a great, rich. I think the fact that it's finished makes it more attractive to writers like me. The Alien Predator thing, it's still ongoing. There's still Alien movies coming out and Predator movies. So it's a bit more difficult plonking yourself into the timeline and into the canon. But with Firefly, it's sort of done and dusted. Although we all, there's always the hope that maybe it'll be resurrected in some form, which would be strange with the actors now. But there's talk of all sorts of possibilities. Animated series, I think they were talking about recently, weren't they?
Yeah, we were always hoping for more and more, but like I say, it's nice that you've got kind of like this finite amount of stuff at the minute.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads me into my next question of what the process is developing the story, because, you know, it has to be something original to pique the reader's interest and the editors. But, you know, did you spend a lot of time considering story ideas, or did they kind of come to you relatively quickly?
So Titan asked me for several ideas, which I then, you know, they asked me basically 4 sort of novel ideas, and I gave them a paragraph each, 4 paragraphs. And Generations was one of them, and I sort of, it was one of my favorites at the time. Another one of my favorites involved Niska, the ultra gangster, and the team trying to break him out of a prison, which I thought would be great fun. But I'll keep that up my sleeve. But yeah, Generations was the one that they went for, and I think it probably, some of the other tie-in stuff I've done, like the Rage War trilogy, is a real action fest, and Generations sort of aired that way as well in some ways. I like the idea of putting the crew into a sort of war mentality in a way. So Titan chose that paragraph and asked me to write a proposal. So I worked on it some more and worked it into a sort of a novel proposal, and they okayed that and sent me away to write it. And that was the end of the beginning, but not the beginning of the end even, because I wrote the novel, and then there was a really heavy editorial process on the novel after I finished writing it, just to make sure I got dotted the I's and crossed the T's when it came to characterization and voice and canon, keeping in the timeline. You know, I couldn't blow up planets that might be used in future comics and things like that. Although I didn't blow up any planets, which isn't a spoiler really.
So not a spoiler, but can you just give our listeners kind of an idea of the narrative of Firefly Generations?
Yes. So I'm actually fascinated with the idea of generation ships and arc ships. I have written a couple of other stories based on that idea. I wrote a novella called Rime, which was a take of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner in space, and that involved a sort of a generation ship. So for me, one of the most intriguing aspects of Firefly is the idea that it's us in the future. It's humanity in the future in another set of star systems. How far from here, we're not really sure. So Earth That Was is referred to a fair bit in the series. And I thought it would be quite interesting to try and find out a bit more, get some more hints about why we fled Earth That Was and how. So in Generations, it refers to a generation ship. So the crew, Mal wins a star chart in a game of cards, which leads the crew to one of the old arcs that came from Earth That Was and brought humanity to the verse, which is still, it's sort of mythical, really. I like the idea of the mythical history in Firefly as well. There are Earth That Was sort of remnants, you know, people deal in old antiques, as it were. But I like the idea of finding one of the actual ships that did it. So the crew go to find the ship with the idea of salvage, but it turns out that it's not an abandoned ship. It's been placed in orbit around a sort of a remote planet, and the Alliance have their hands in it as well.
Yeah, no, that's a nice teaser amount for listeners to hopefully want to go ahead and read this. Yeah, read Firefly Generations. So you mentioned that there was quite a heavy editorial process because, you know, these are already established characters. Did you find it easy initially writing these characters?
I like to think I got into the flow of it quite easily. I really like all the characters. I mean, I should say that Inara and Book don't play a big part in the book because they're absent from the adventures. So listeners probably need to know that. But all the other characters, they're so distinctive in the series. It's one of some series with ensemble casts, you sort of get confused sometimes about who's who. But in Firefly, they're all so distinctive. They all got their own real distinctive personalities and quirks and habits and peccadillos, you know. So I enjoyed getting into that. And there's some characters I sort of concentrated on more than others, I guess. I really like Jane. I tried to give Jane a bit more, I suppose, in my first drafts, I tried to give him a bit more empathy and humanity, but I sort of had to draw back on that a little bit because, you know, my editor said, no, he really is a bit of an arse. So don't make him too likable. He's a bit of a bumbling buffoon in some ways, quite threatening, but I see him as I don't know. There's more to Jane, and I think we'd have found out more about Jane if the series had continued. I think I'm sure Joss Whedon had ideas for all the characters, wheedling out their part.
Yeah.
I enjoyed doing it. I did have to, like I say, in the editorial process, I had to tweak some of the language and some of the characterization. I think had to get my head around the quirky language they use some more Mandarin phrases, for instance. But luckily, Titan sent me the encyclopedia of the Firefly, so there's a whole list of Mandarin phrases in there. So I made sure I incorporated some of the great Mandarin swearing, which is great fun.
So, which character, you said that Jane's your favourite? Well, Jane's my favourite character in Firefly, but what was there a character that you found particularly challenging to write?
Yeah, so I think the novel sort of concentrates on River in many respects. The spine of the novel involves River and her past, without giving away too much to the listeners. And she's the most mysterious character in the series, I think. So I found it not difficult getting into her. Well, her mind's a pretty strange place anyway, but not difficult getting into her mind. But I was trying to be quite careful not to develop her character too much away from away from Firefly canon, really. So I found it quite difficult writing River. Like I say, especially as she's the sort of focus in many respects. She's her relationship with someone they find on the ship is the focus of the novel, really. But she's always intrigued me a lot. She's a pretty cool character, I think, and the fact that she acts, she's sort of confused and a bit woo-woo, and then she can take out 4 guys in 3 seconds, is pretty cool, really. So I enjoyed writing River.
Yeah, she's pretty awesome, pretty interesting character. My next question is, was there a character you enjoyed writing most? So was that Jane, because you can kind of get away with saying a lot of stuff? Or? I
think so. I quite like Jane. But also Kaylee, Kaylee's fun. I liked that. So there's a part in the novel where Kaylee and Jane are alone for a while. And I really love the dynamic between them. Kaylee's so honest and nice and decent. And Jane, on the surface, is sort of totally the opposite. It's like 2 opposite sides of the same character almost fighting each other. But yeah, I think I enjoyed Jane the most writing him, because you always enjoy, as a writer, I sort of enjoy writing characters who are, have dark side and light side, different depths, So he was fun.
So the voice acting done by James Anderson Foster for the audiobook is excellent. Do you get any say in who narrates your books?
No, not very often, and especially not for tie-in projects. I think that's sort of way out of my hands. My own original novels, I'm usually sent like sample readings from narrators. But even something like, the first Alien novel I did for Titan was turned into a fantastic audio dramatization by Dirk Maggs, the legendary Dirk Maggs. It had Rutger Hauer in it and all that, and I didn't, I love hearing from people who say how much they love it. But to be honest, I didn't have an awful lot to do with it. Dirk did the adaptations and obviously the casting and all that was out of my hands. And I don't mind that. It's good to hear somebody else's take on what I've written. And sometimes you hear stuff in there that, oh, blimey, did I write that? I'm not sure that's what I meant, but it's good,
So we kind of touched on this already, but, how did you approach these stories where you have an established world and characters, but, you're a creator who wants to create, as much of your own story as possible? Were you able to do whatever you want, or were you given prompts? So you said they asked you to kind of pitch a few stories, but did they give you any pointers as to things that they might want to see, or it was kind of completely up to you?
Honestly, I think at the time it was just pitch us a few ideas. And there are obviously limits to what you can do. And also, so my novel's based between Firefly and Serenity. So because of the timeline and because of canon, there's limits to what you can do and who you can kill, obviously. I can't wipe out the entire crew in a great climax battle, because that just wouldn't work. But most tie-in stuff I've done, like I did a Star Wars novel, and that was similarly left up to me, unless my ideas intruded on stuff they were working on elsewhere. my Star Wars novel was 25,000 years before A New Hope. So it was literally the earliest novel in the Star Wars timeline, which is great because it meant I didn't have to read 150 other novels to make sure I fitted in the timeline well. But publishers tend to give you as much free reign as possible, whilst ensuring you don't mess things up for the timeline, and they have to ensure canon. Kat at Titan was particularly good at making sure I didn't write somebody out of character for no apparent reason, or mess up. Like there are Hands of Blue in the novel, for instance, and she made sure I was pretty careful about how I wrote them so that it didn't detract from people's memories of them in the series, for instance. But yeah, pretty much free reign on the story. Characters have their own limitations, but it's quite nice to try and get into their heads and figure out, what makes them tick a little bit more than you maybe see in the series.
So you kind of just talked about this already, but basically we know of a writer contracted to write for an established IP, and there was kind of this brand Bible and things that they couldn't change. So, what was the working relationship like with Fox and Titan? And did you have to work with a brand Bible? I know you just mentioned that you have someone who kind of says, you can do this, you can't do that.
Yeah, so I didn't deal with Fox directly on this. I did when I was doing Alien books, but with this, I was dealing straight with Titan, and they were going to Fox for approvals, which I think they only did twice. I think they got the original story approved from Fox and said, "Yep, go ahead." And then when the novel was finished and edited, I think they sent that to Fox for approval. So yeah, it was Kat Camacho, and a couple of other guys at Titan had a hand in sort of steering the project after I'd written it. But they did send me a load of, I got the Firefly encyclopedia, got 2 or 3 other Firefly books here. The encyclopedia especially was priceless. I probably couldn't have done it without that. Or I could have, but it would have meant watching the series like 15 times to get references. But the encyclopedia, for instance, has got almost a map of the verse, laying out the stars and the planets and the moons. And loads of even stuff like weaponry. Jane does love his guns, but I had to make sure that he used them the same way as he does in the series, for instance. So the encyclopedia was the Bible, really, and it was really priceless for me using that writing the book. And then Kat's input at the end was brilliant. Her editorial. Kat's a big Firefly fan, obviously, and she's really sharp on picking up stuff that I might have done wrong. So yeah, that was great.
So was there anything that you wanted to write that Fox or Disney wouldn't allow, or did pretty much everything you sent initially get, the okay?
I think it was all okay, really. Other than what I've mentioned about the editorial tweaks. The one thing I didn't do in my first draft, which Titan tried to encourage, was looking at more the history of Earth that was and how that fed into the verse. So I had to go back in and sort of think up some more examples of what might be on the Sun Tzu, the name of the generation ship that might be brought from Earth that was. So that was quite interesting doing that. But I don't think there was anything that Fox read and thought, whoa, that can't happen, And that's Titan's job to make sure, and it worked well, to make sure that what I'd written was approved. And I'm pretty sure it was approved without comment without any changes from Fox eventually, after a couple of edits.
The stories that you've written are now considered canon. Does that make you feel like good and proud to kind of be part of this universe, or does it stress you out a little bit?
No, it's great. I love it. It's I'm pretty sure the Alien novels I've written are canon as well, but I don't know how that changes when it comes to Ridley Scott making new movies. Yeah, it's great. It's nice. It does open you up to. I'm not as big a Firefly fan as a lot of the readers, and I'll say the same about the Star Wars novel I've written. Some of the readers, some of the reviews mention stuff. I think, whoa, I wouldn't even have thought of that. The way Jane said something on page 42, he wouldn't have said it like that. So really, I don't know. So it opens you up to serious fans analysis, but that's fine. I know that going in. The Star Wars novel was interesting because that was canon when I wrote it, and now it's not. It's Star Wars Legends because Disney. But then, but that's fine. I was hoping to write a trilogy, and I think if Disney hadn't given George Lucas $4 billion, I might have been able to write a trilogy. But I'm not complaining. That's okay.
I like that though, because Disney.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of I think the fact that Disney took over Star Wars so far has been great. We've especially the series Mandalorian, I thought was just a stunning bit of work. And it's just nice for seeing, we saw Rogue One and things like that, which is such a great film.
So, was there a scene that you particularly enjoyed writing, like a favourite part of the book?
I like the sort of. Again, trying not to give too much away, but there's a bit of a sort of a battle on the ship towards the end, and I like writing battle scenes in space. I don't know why, that's a very particular thing, but I quite enjoy it, and I did it on my the Alien and Predator trilogy. It's just a wide ranging. It's a far distant war in space, and I had so much fun doing that. So I did it on a smaller scale in Generations. And I like the sort of confusion of battle and failing communications and the team being split up, not knowing what's happened to other members. Like, Wash and Zoe, for instance, not really knowing what's going on with each other. Wash suffers a bit in my book, bless him. So I enjoy writing the battle scenes, but I really enjoyed writing Kaylee and Jane being off together. Like I mentioned before, I enjoyed their interaction between those two characters, especially when they're under threat. And they're sort of trying to help each other. You sort of see a slightly more heroic side of Jane there, I think. I think that was left in.
I can say it is a long process. So I guess once you're, you don't really go back and reread everything that you've written, or it take up a large portion of your life, wouldn't it?
Well, during the editorial process, I probably read I don't know how many times I read the book, probably, during the editorial process, another 3 or 4 times I went through completely, and then there's often you dip in and out of sections to tweak stuff here and there. It's very. I don't think I've ever received a box of my books and opened it and read it. The last time I read it is the line edit. Really sick of it by then. I've read it hundreds of times. Yeah.
After that, it's just for the fans to enjoy.
Yeah, it's on the shelf. I've got my ego shelf, as most writers. But it's a lovely looking book. I mean, Titan did a great job with the Firefly novels. They all look gorgeous. Distressed covers, and yeah, it looks great. It looks like an artifact from the verse, the Firefly novel. I think you can sort of think, oh, that's been on a desert planet for a year or two.
That was the little snippet of the interview. Like I said, we chatted about. So that was the Rage War, which is Predator Incursion, Alien Invasion, Alien vs Predator, Armageddon, and they are all like one story. So if you're interested in Alien, definitely give those a look. But yeah, the full interview will be released later in this week.
You know what they should do? Oh, sorry, I just wanted to throw a little idea to the Alien book people.
Okay.
On the last page of their books, they should just have, when the reader turns the page, like a pop-out thing that just, like, goes, boo, like, right in their face. I think that would be a good idea.
See,
it's free.
Everyone I meet kind of says that Alien is, or would probably describe the Alien movies as a sci-fi. But, like, if you ask my brother what his favourite horror movie is, he will say Alien. Because he straight up, and it is a horror, but it's kind of gone into horror because it's sci-fi, it's horror sci-fi, and then it kind of just ends up getting branded as sci-fi, when really at its depth it is a horror movie that just happens to be that the bad guys in this horror movie aren't ghosts or zombies or whatever, they're aliens. So, but my brother stands by that it's like the scariest movie of all time, and it is if you watch it, it's all very dark. And the suspense in the Alien movies is just kind of like insane. And the same if you play any of the games. Some of the there's good and bad if you're looking into the Alien games, but they're definitely, if you can say anything about them, they are extremely scary. Because most of it's just like wandering around dark spaces, waiting for something to jump out at you.
It's a bit like Dead Space.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say very much like Dead Space, that kind of suspenseful game. You're in the void of space, you've got this little gun, and you know that there are things that can kill you around every corner.
Okay, a voice message from our friend from the podcast, Steve Brown. Here we go.
This is Steve, and this is for Bushwhacked. I believe you said you're going to follow the order that Joss has them on the Blu-ray, so that would put Bushwhacked after Train Job. I forgot about that Kaylee, you've got this on wrong. I thought was hilarious. I absolutely love that brief interrogation scene with all the different characters and washes. Have you ever been with a warrior woman? Just great. Just terrific. Such a good episode. I don't know if I'd classify it as one of my favorites of the season, but you know, when you only have 13 episodes, there's not a lot to choose from as far as favorites or not favorites. It does set up a lot for us. It shows us who the Alliance is, shows us who the Reavers are, shows us River's powers and things. So it really is a good episode, and I like it. I enjoy it. It was a good rewatch, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this season going along with you on this rewatch. So can't wait to hear you guys talk about this one. And if I didn't mention it before, I love the fact that you guys, the majority of you guys saw the movie Serenity, and that's what prompted you to check out the TV series, which for some of us, we saw the TV series and we were so just jazzed when the movie came out. So, all right, talk to you later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely one of my favorite episodes. Top 5 for sure. And we can maybe do a ranking later, but I tentatively, I would say number 1, Out of Gas, number 2, Objects in Space, number 3, Janestown, and number 4, this one. That's the hierarchy so far. Obviously, that's fluid, and it changes with my preferences, but that's how I feel in this moment, and concretizing that feeling, I will, tell that's the ranking as far as today.
Yeah, see, I'm not sure on my rankings, because I know, like, if I was ever just going to throw on an episode, it would be Janestown or Shindig, because they're kind of, like, fun, adventurous. You can just kind of watch them and have fun. So, yeah, I think as we go along, I will be compiling my kind of rankings, and when we get to the end, we'll see.
Rewatchability and what is your favorite are two different things.
Right.
Cool.
Thank
you, Steve Brown.
Thank you, Steve Brown. So, that brings us to the end. Chirag has taught us lots of interesting things this episode. I hope that our listeners have learned as much as I have. And
there'll be a pop quiz on the next podcast. So
no, my memory's not very good.
Study up.
I'll be like, a guy pushed a boulder up a hill. We learned things.
All right.
No, thank you, Chirag. And thank you, listeners. If you have any letters that you would like us to discuss, please send them to fireflybits@gmail.com. That's fireflybits@gmail.com.
That's it for this episode. Thank you again for listening, everybody. Have a good day or night, depending on your time zone.
Thanks for listening. Bye.